I read 29 books in the year of 2023, and I am here to rate every single one of them with you. Hi everyone, if you're new here, my name is Kaylin. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in History and African American Studies at Yale. I make YouTube videos about my life as a graduate student, but I also make content about my life living in London. I talk about books a lot, so if that's something that you're into, definitely hit the subscribe button. But today we're talking all about the books that I read in 2023. Now here's the thing, I technically took my comprehensive exams in March. And for my comprehensive exams for my PhD, I technically had to read just over 200 books. I'm not including them in this particular video because I was skim reading for most of them. I was preparing for exams, and I also have blacked out most of my memory of those books because the challenge of studying for that exam was... You can go watch the vlog if you want to know how it went. But I passed, I finished those books, and I really dove into reading for fun this year. As a kid, I used to read a lot, but ever since I went to community college and was working full-time, I had made this dedicated promise to myself that I was going to be focused on school and really focused on becoming a more productive and efficient student. And you know what? That was a long time ago now. I transferred, I got my master's, and then I slowly began falling back in love with fiction. But 2023 was my year of really steeping myself in fun reading that I genuinely enjoyed. I really got into book talk content and watching BookTube, and now I'm just obsessed. I apologize in advance to those of you that only came to this channel to watch graduate school content. You're still gonna get that, but we're also gonna tie in a lot of books. So I've now rambled on quite enough, so I'm gonna go ahead and dive right in. First, we're gonna start off with fiction, and this is in no particular order because I don't quite remember everything that I read back when I was in New Haven. Before I left the States to come to the UK, I actually boxed up a lot of my books, and so I don't quite remember everything that I read at the beginning of the year. So there may be more on this list, I just don't remember them. But I do remember starting the year off by reading Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. I personally love the Bridgerton TV show, and I knew that eventually they were going to come out with season 3 and that it was going to be centered on Penelope and Colin's story, and I just wanted to read the book. So I jumped forward to number 4, and this book was delightful. Such an enjoyable read, mostly because I've gotten to know and love the characters from the TV show, and though they have little bits and pieces about them in the first couple of books, I really enjoyed getting to hear about their story, and I am so excited to see how they adapt this on screen. It's coming out, I think, in May, and I cannot wait. I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 5. It was absolutely delightful. I really enjoyed it, but I will say that things that make it onto my 5-star list have to make me feel things, and although it gave me the warm and fuzzies, it wasn't something that I felt like was a huge impactful book on this year. So giving Romancing Mr. Bridgerton a 4 out of 5. Next up, we've got Miss Sarah J. Maas and the ACOTAR series. I finished A Court of Thorns and Roses in 2022 at the request, or rather demand, of Katie and Chanel. They made a PowerPoint presentation to tell me why it is that I should read ACOTAR, because back in 2022, I strongly believed that I was not somebody that enjoyed fantasy. In fact, I might have actually read ACOTAR in 2021. I can't quite remember. I did not like the first book very much. Things started to pick up around 2/3 of the way through the book, and I nearly DNF'd it like 3 different times. But I will say that Sarah J. Maas knows how to write a good hook at the end. She really knows how to give you a good little plot twist just to pull at your heartstrings and get you excited about the next book. I'll be honest, I picked up A Court of Mist and Fury because Chanel loves it, and because I heard so many people on the internet loved it, and I got to about, I don't know, 150 pages in when I first started reading it back in 2022 and was like, no, you know what, I'm just gonna quit. This isn't for me. I don't like fantasy. And oh, was I wrong. I picked this up again this year when I was doing my Replacing Scrolling with Reading challenge. There's a whole vlog of when I was reading this book, and this book changed my mind. This is the book that made me realize that I actually do like fantasy. And while I have my criticisms about this book because of the actual writing, I just feel like the world building is really intense, and I feel like there's somewhat unnecessary description at times. I did genuinely enjoy the book, so I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 5. I did not enjoy it at first, but it picked up, and then I fell in love with the characters, and by the end, by that little twist at the end, I was dying to know more. And then I read A Court of Wings and Ruin. This book was what changed it for me, really, because A Court of Mist and Fury gave me like a taster of why it is that I would like fantasy, but this book really did it for me. I was so invested in the characters by this point. I loved the fact that the main character, Farah, just comes into her own and is not willing to put up with anybody's BS anymore, and I really appreciate that. I struggle with the main character a little bit. Farah is not my favorite protagonist. I know that's blasphemy. You might not agree with that, but she's not my favorite. However, this book was my favorite out of all of the ACOTAR books. So this one gets a solid 5 out of 5 for me. I loved this book. In November, I read A Court of Frost and Starlight, as well as A Court of Silver Flames. And this is a novella. It's obviously significantly shorter than the rest of the ACOTAR books. And I gave this a 4.25 out of 5. I know that it's intended to shift our attention away from Farah and towards the perspectives of the other characters. You know, it was just a nice little read. It's not much to say about it. Then we have A Court of Silver Flame. Now here's the thing. I, like many people, really struggled to actually like and connect with Nesta as a character. But I will say that the character development is excellent. So first and foremost, disclaimer, this is my opinion. You can disagree with me. You loving these characters is no shade on your perspectives and your opinions. This is just my perspective on reading this book. And I personally just don't like the relationship between Cassian and Nesta. I feel like she's taking advantage of him. I don't like the way that she treats him. Yeah, that part wasn't what did it for me. The thing that did it for me was the friendship and the little girl squad that is developed in this book. And that found family element that Farah gets to experience, I love that Nessa gets to experience it in a slightly different way. And so I gave this book a 4.25 out of 5. I did enjoy reading it. Good spice, but I have my qualms. Another book that I read near the beginning of the year was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is actually a signed ARC that I got when I was at school. I have a friend who had classes with her and who told her how much I loved her books, and she gave me this signed ARC. I actually got to have brunch with her, and she's just a lovely human being. And the fact that such a lovely, intellectual, kind of quiet individual has such an absolutely brilliant mind when it comes to writing books like The Poppy War and Babel and Yellowface. Her range astounds me. The fact that she wrote these books while she's in a PhD program, as somebody who is also in a PhD program, I am just amazed by her. I think she's one of the most incredible people and one of the most incredible authors, and I will read anything she ever produces. However, let's talk about Yellowface. This book is an expose fiction on the publishing industry. So it's about two friends who went to school together and they're both authors, and one of them becomes really popular while the other one really struggles to get attention and publishing deals and is incredibly jealous of this frenemy that she has in the other author. Now, the first author dies, and the rather unsuccessful author steals an unpublished manuscript in her apartment. This book was a roller coaster. It gave me the most intense anxiety. The Twitter wars, the keyboard warriors and everything just reminded me of every hate comment I've ever received. And so it made me feel many, many things. I was so anxious, but I have recommended this book to everyone. I would do it all over again. I was up all night reading this because I was so anxious. And although the ending was a little strange, I'm still gonna give this a 5 out of 5. Next we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This book was the definition of bittersweet. This book is about a coffee shop in Tokyo which has a seat where you can travel back in time, but there's a lot of really stringent rules related to time travel, and you can only stay in the past for the amount of time before the coffee gets cold. And also anything that happens in the past cannot impact the future. This book, in my opinion, did a really good job of discussing and depicting really emotionally challenging situations relating to grief or regret and memory loss and things of that nature in a way that I just felt like was really beautifully done and was also really sensitive. The chapter that really did it for me was the chapter about the sisters, and I thought that this was going to be the chapter that really wrecked me, but the thing that I loved about this book and the way that it's written and the way that it's been translated is that it just kind of touches on the nerve, but it doesn't press into it. if that's the analogy we're going with. And I didn't cry while reading this book. I felt things. Like, I felt like that sadness and that sense of bittersweet, but never to the point where I felt like it was overdoing it. And I just felt like this was such a beautiful book. And so I'm giving this one a 4.75 out of 5. Not in my top reads, but definitely something that I do recommend to people. Okay, so the next one is a book that I know that everybody really likes, and one of my favorite authors really likes this book, but this is The Idiot by Elif Bauman. And I should have DNF'd this. So the general synopsis is that we have a main character who is from Turkey, and she goes to Harvard in the 90s. And it's about her strange interactions and communications with her roommate and this guy who is Hungarian. It wasn't for me. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and be like, stop talking to him. And while I understand that that's the age that she is, and we've all been in that situation where we keep talking to somebody who just doesn't respect us and who doesn't have our best interest at heart, I was just infuriated. And I know that there's a second book. I will not be reading it. I did not enjoy this book very much. I understand why people like it, but the writing style, I just realized, is just a little too nonsensical for my mind. And maybe I'm just better off sticking with fantasy, romance, and historical fiction. Completely forgot to give this a rating. This is going to be a 2 out of 5 for me. And now we're on to one of my favorites of the year. This is a book that I have gifted so many people because it's just so beautiful. And this is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. I just thought this was a beautiful illustration of neurodiversity and how neurodiversity impacts one's emotional relationships. And I just thought this was beautiful. I think everyone should read this book. This is a solid 5 out of 5. Next, we have an independently published novel by Chelsea Fagan, the CEO of The Financial Diet, and this is The Perfect Vintage. I followed Chelsea Fagan's journey publishing this. She made various videos about her decision to go with independent publishing and how it is that she worked with an editor and all of those things. And I just really enjoyed following that journey. And so I bought this book specifically to support Chelsea Fagan. However, I really enjoyed this one. It's about a woman who works with resort chains in France to basically remodel chateaus into resorts. And she goes and she meets this French family. She stirs up a little romance with one of the sons. Her friend joins her who's going through a divorce. It is a beautiful mess. And I just genuinely really enjoyed it. It's not in my favorites of the year. It's not groundbreaking, but it is just delightful. So I'm gonna give this one a 4.5 out of 5. Now the next two books I would love to share with you are of my top reads of the year. They got over 5 out of 5 on both, and it is a beautiful duology. However, I am participating in the St. Martin's Press boycott. St. Martin's Press has an employee who has spouted a lot of Islamophobic rhetoric online, and though the book community has asked St. Martin's Press to respond to these allegations and these statements by the employee or to take action and to uphold their mission of diversity and inclusion, they have just chosen to remain silent. And while I absolutely love this author and love these books, I cannot in my right mind share them with you and support St. Martin's Press. I love this author and I will continue to read them on my own, but I create videos that get thousands of views and I don't want to support a company that refuses to speak up about Islamophobic behavior within its company. But the gist is that I am participating in the St. Martin's Press boycott, and so I will not be talking about these two books. I will, however, talk about my favorite series of the year, and that is the All Souls trilogy, which starts with The Discovery of Witches. The Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness is about a history professor from Yale who studies early modern history and alchemy, who is in Oxford on sabbatical after getting tenure and comes across a missing, forbidden, magical manuscript. As an early modern historian, this book changed my life. The historian in question is a witch and she meets a vampire. There are demons, and I just loved this book. Everything about it. I can't say enough good about it. This is my #1 read of the year. I will shout about it until the cows come home. And I think the reason I love this book so much is because as a historian, the way that she talks about the historical profession and the perspectives of historians on historical events, especially when you see interactions between Diana the witch and Matthew the vampire. So Matthew's lived through thousands of years of human history and Diana just researches it. And so they have these really fascinating conversations about evolution and Darwin and all of these things that she has read about and studied, but he's lived it. And I just thought that that contrast is just so beautifully done, and I love this book. The second book in the Also trilogy is Shadow of Night, and this book is set in Elizabethan London. So Matthew and Diana have to figure out the mysteries of this manuscript, and so they decide to go back in time. Again, as an early American historian and as somebody who now lives in London, oh God, this book was just delightful. I think that I loved it the most because of the amount of detail and obvious research that went into making this book possible. As a historian, I obviously love historical fiction, but I love historical fiction that is written by a historian who really knows how to do the research and put us in the middle of it. I had some trouble with the pacing at times, but overall this was just such a delightful book, and I was just giddy reading through it because of all of the details and intricacy that obviously involved a lot of research. So I'm going to give this one a 4.75 out of 5. It wasn't as good as the first book, but if you're somebody that loves history, especially history related to Elizabethan London, you need to read the series. Then we have the third and final installment, which is The Book of Life, and I want to rave about this book. I really do, but I was so frustrated. There's 4 major things that I get frustrated about with this book. The first is that it starts off reading as though you don't know what's happened in the last 2 books. And I get really frustrated when series do that, as though we haven't, invested tens of hours in the book and the characters. So that just kind of took me out of it at the beginning. The second piece that I found really frustrating is they move a lot. There's a lot of just moving across geography. First they're in upstate New York, and then they're in France, and then they're in New Haven, and then they're in London, and then they're in Venice, and then they're in Germany, and it's just too much. There's too much moving around. The third thing that I struggled with was the loss of Diana's independence and character. She just kind of falls immediately into this trope of she meets a man and, her entire life's ambition is to be the provider of that family and to be the caretaker. I hate when authors do this. And I understand that by the end, she kind of sees a way to maintain her autonomy and independence. I don't know, there's something about it that just felt a little bit off. And then the ending was so quick. It felt like you spent about 400 pages really getting into the plot, and then all of the action takes place in 20 or 30 pages, and then it's just kind of over. I just felt like it was trying to weave together all of the strings that it had exposed throughout the series, and I understand that that's what this book was meant to do, but I felt like it probably needed to be about 100 pages longer, or it needed to be broken into 2 books. I'm gonna give this one a 3.5 out of 5, and I hate saying that, but it wasn't as good as the other 2. Next up, we've got The Secret History. This is the classic dark academia book. It is about a school in New England, and this group of friends come together to participate in this Greek class. They get into some entanglements, and these are some deeply problematic, shady, gray characters. I hadn't read much dark academia literature before, other than, for example, Babel. And so some of the tropes that I think exist within the genre, I hadn't been exposed to much yet, and I understand where it came from now. I really enjoyed this book. It gave me a heart attack. I have realized that I am not a thriller reader. It makes me anxious, and I know that it makes most people anxious, but it just sent me into a bit of a frenzy, and I desperately wanted to finish this book so that way I could be put out of my misery. The ending was a little funny. I felt like it was a little bit longer than it needed to be. However, I genuinely did enjoy this book, and I like a book where there is a lot of complexity to the characters, where you see the horrible things that they do, and you see the positive that they bring to their friendships or positive that they bring in general, and you can't quite wrap your head around it. And I like a morally gray character. So I am going to give this one a 4.75 out of 5. It was one of the top books of the year. It's definitely one that I will reread, but it's not one that I would say is the top tippy top of my list. Next, we've got the first 3 books in the Throne of Glass series, which is The Assassin's Blade, Throne of Glass, and Crown of Midnight. This is the YA fantasy series that was first published by Sarah J. Maas before ACOTAR. I had finished A Court of Wings in Ruin, and I was looking to potentially move on to Crescent City, but everyone told me that I shouldn't move on to Crescent City before finishing the ACOTAR series, and that I should instead read Throne of Glass. So I picked up the series, and I am so glad that I did, because I actually like the series more than I like ACOTAR. I think it's the setting for me, and also the main character, Selena. I like her, love her so much more. There's just something about her independent streak and her kind of inner dialogue that I really enjoy. I also like that in this book, the romance is quite secondary, whereas in ACOTAR, I would say it's like 50-50, but this book is definitely more of a fantasy series than a romance series, and I personally love it. I personally give Throne of Glass 4.5 out of 5. I give Crown of Midnight a 4.5 out of 5. The ending really has me on the edge of my seat, and I am dying to start the next book. However, I have so many books that I'm currently reading, so I'm going to get to it in the beginning of 2024 and finish this series. And Assassin's Blade, I personally didn't love. I just felt like it was an unnecessary installment. Everybody tells me that by book 4 or 5 in the series, I'll see why this book was necessary. So at the moment, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, but I might change my mind. And last but not least, we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Lauren Roberts independently published this book, and she is a book talker, and she actually got traditionally published. So I managed to pick this up in the UK, and this book was so much fun. It feels like if Grown Up Hunger Games met Throne of Glass and had a baby. The main character was orphaned at 13 when her father, who was a healer, was killed by the king. She has been thieving for survival ever since. And in this world, there's basically 3 different types of people. There's elites that have really extravagant magical powers. You have got mundanes that have kind of mundane magical powers. Then you have ordinaries, and ordinaries are illegal. They were either banished, or if they exist, they are executed. And she is an ordinary who has been passing off as a mundane by faking her powers. And she is enlisted to participate in this purging trial. And there's like a love triangle romance element to this that was really intriguing. I felt like parts were a little repetitive, and I felt like the writing could definitely use a bit more maturity. However, I am going to keep reading the series because I think that over time, this author's writing is just going to get better. And I'm going to give this one a 4.25 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. It was definitely one of my favorite reads this year, and I look forward to seeing how the series continues to develop. Now we're gonna move on to nonfiction, and I'm gonna try to keep this short and sweet because I just realized that I've been recording for like 45 minutes. First and foremost is a book that I actually read for research, but I also think is just a beautiful piece of writing. It is nonfiction, but it reads like a novel, and this is Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman. Saidiya Hartman is a scholar and professor at Columbia who writes a lot about archival ethics and relationship to the history of slavery, and this is her journey back to Ghana to reconnect with her ancestral past, and it is just so incredibly beautifully written, and I just think that everybody should read this. I think that more people need to read about the history of slavery in general, but if you're looking for a way to do so within a piece that is nonfiction but is still quite personal, then I highly recommend this one. Easy 5 out of 5. Another history book that I read this year for research, but I do want to count towards a recommendation, is Black Tutors by Miranda Kaufman. This tells the history of Black people living in England during the Tudor period, and each chapter is broken into a type of biography. It's super easy to read and tells you so much about the history of England and African descendant individuals that lived in England in the early modern period. Highly recommend. Next, we've got How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. Katie was trying to put me onto this book for so long, and this summer I finally got to read it. And this book essentially is about the attention economy and rejection of not just hustle culture, but rejection of having to constantly do or having to constantly be. And while I did have some challenges with this book and I would love to do a more in-depth review, I got a lot out of this in terms of her discussions about connections to nature and a resistance, an active resistance to the need to do and to be. And there's so much more I could say about this book, but I'm trying to keep it short and sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a 4.25 out of 5. Then we have Financial Feminist by Tori Dunlap. This was my financial Bible this year. I had such a negative relationship with finances at the beginning of 2023. I had $0 in savings. I had no investments. I was really stressed about my student loans and about taxes, and this book just really outlined not only how to approach your finances, also how to positively heal your relationship with finances because of the beliefs that you've taken on since your childhood. And I actually incorporated a lot of the practices of reflection and trying to find ways to improve your relationship with money in my Notion template and how it is that I personally review my finances. So I'm going to give this one a 4.75 out of 5. Next, we've got The Perfection Trap by Thomas Curran. I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5 because it just didn't really tell me anything new. I just felt like it gave me a definition for what perfectionism is and gave some general tactics on how to combat it, but it just didn't feel groundbreaking, and I honestly felt like it was a little bit of a waste of my time reading it. So I'm not really going to recommend it to anyone. It's, you know, it's fine. Next, we're going to get to the books that I DNF'd, and this is going to make people mad. And I'm sorry if these are your favorite books, but these are books that I just couldn't finish. I thought about trying to restart a few of them and honestly just decided that my time is better spent reading things that I really love. And so these are the books that I DNF. First book I don't have with me because I actually gave it to a friend because I wasn't planning on finishing it, and that was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I know that people love this book and I know why they love this book. I just didn't connect with it. I didn't connect with the writing style. I did think I was going to connect with this more than I did. And I got about halfway because we were reading it for the book club for Acceptance Society, and I just, it just fell flat. I couldn't finish it. I'm sorry. Next, we've got The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic by Brianne Randall. I wanted so badly to love this book. I wanted so badly. I found the main character really frustrating, and it starts in a cafe and she's a witch and she's got this brother who's been missing, and then her brother and her ex show up in town, and then all this stuff starts happening. And then there's like this reveal moment with their grandmother and the things that you learn about the magic that they have and their parentage, and that they're the result of their mother having been sexually assaulted. I brought this book with me on a trip to Cambridge, and when I got to Cambridge, I went and bought another book because I couldn't keep reading. People are gonna be mad about this one, but Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I will say I understand why people enjoy it. It is a warm and fuzzy kind of fantasy romance. I could not connect with the main character. It just wasn't doing it for me. YA romantasy is just not really my jam. And so I know that now. I'm gonna give this to a friend so that they can love it. But I'm not gonna continue reading. And lastly, we've got Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I got a fair chunk of the way through. I got about 2/3 of the way through and then just decided I can't do this anymore. The world building did not make sense to me. I found the romantic tension between Violet and Xaden to just be a bit thin. I just wasn't really feeling it. And I just came to realize that this book may be written for people that aren't heavily invested in the fantasy genre. And I thought I was one of those people when I picked this up. I didn't think that I was an avid fantasy reader. It just wasn't doing it for me, and I had to DNF it. Now, to end this video on a positive note, I want to talk a little bit about my reading goals for 2024. So I want to read 52 books. So I would like to read about a book a week, and I would also like to incorporate more nonfiction. I had a couple nonfiction books that I started this year, but I didn't read all the way through, and I want to make it a goal to read an entirety of a nonfiction, science-based or productivity-focused book in 2024. About once a month. In terms of reading practice, I want more fantasy. I want more historical fiction outside of my subject area. I want to read more sci-fi. I just started reading Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I would really like to get into more sci-fi related novels. So if you have any recommendations for what I should be reading in 2024, then definitely go ahead and leave me a comment below. And if you'd like to join a book club with me, I hosted a book club through Accepted Society, which is an online community for scholars, academics, anybody that basically wants a community to study with, get work done with, go to book clubs, do our monthly planning session. So if that's something that you would be interested in, then definitely check out joining below. You can give it a trial for a couple of days to see if it's something that would work for you. And I hope you all have a wonderful new year. I cannot wait to see what it is that we all read and cannot wait to make more book content. So I'll see you all soon.